This story begins in January 1945, east of Stettin, near the Polish border on the Baltic. The Russians are making a big push towards Berlin, and the Germans do not want us freed by the Russians. I think they wanted us as hostages. So they marched us across the top along the Baltic Sea, where we eventually ended in Lubeck, and later took a train, ended up down in Bremervorde between Bremen and Hamburg. But going back to the story of that march, it was very, very cold winter. Lots of snow blizzards. We were marching, we were cold, we were hungry. Some men didn't make it. And on one of the stops, where they usually put us into barns, we got onto this baron's estate, and one of the farmers that was Polish workers that were in charge of the farms, because some of the German farmers had gone off to fight the Russians, try and stop them coming in. So the Polish workers were left in full charge, and they told a war buddy friend of mine who was of Polish descent that if we could escape, he would get us a horse meat stew and some girls, Polish girls that worked on the various farms around there. And he gave us a general area where we escaped. There was a creek about a mile from this barn and little woods, and he was to meet us there. And so Casey, who was the Polish Canadian, asked a bunch of guys whether they want to escape. He would take seven men. As it happened, only 4 of us agreed to go, and I was one of them. And to get out of the camp was not that easy, because the barn, we had 2 barns with a courtyard in between the barns and a wall on one side and a fence on the other. So we decided to go over the fence, but around the perimeter of the wall were German soldiers patrolling with German pincers and shepherds dogs. So we were starting to go up the wall, and I was the first one to go over. But before I dropped, which was the wall was about 11 or 12 feet high, I could hear this dog coming towards me, because he had sensed that something was happening where we were going over the wall, and it was snowing so badly the German soldier couldn't see us, but the dog did. And I had to get everybody to pull me back up, which wasn't easy, because we weren't in that good a shape at the time. And the dog got a part of my heel, but the German soldier, he came along to this particular spot, and the dog was barking and sort of half climbing up the wall, but he couldn't see anything, so he thought the dog was just overreacting, so eventually he moved away. So we had to find another place to get out. So the other barn was full of machinery, and there were some loose boards, and we got through these loose boards and eventually got to this little woods where we met this Polish worker who had this farm. And on the way to the farm, the farm was situated along with other farms to make a kind of a small village, something like in French Canada. The French farms are sometimes long and narrow like this. And as we were coming up towards the farm, there was a German patrol coming along the road, because that night they were bombing Stettin, and a couple of Lancaster bombers had been hit, and the English airmen had bailed out, and this patrol was looking for them. So it was a wrong night for us to be out to get a meat stew. Anyway, we eventually got to this farm, and coming into the farm, between the two farms, there was a lane, and as we were coming up the lane, we had to go over this wall, because where we were going was on the second floor, which had originally been an attic, and the farmer had sort of fixed it up for these Polish workers, and it was a sort of a makeshift steps. But on the ground floor there was German SS troops, which he didn't tell us until we were just 100 yards or so from the farm, that we had to be very quiet. Anyway, luckily we got in okay, and he started to make the stew, and Casey was giving him a hand, and there was only one girl came over. The other girls chickened out, I guess, because it was very dangerous. If they were caught with prisoners, they could have been shot also. Anyway, she had lived in Paris, and her father had been had worked at the embassy the Polish embassy in Paris, and she could speak a little French, and I could remember a little high school French, so we did communicate a bit. And during this conversation with this girl, there was other Polish workers came from the other farms, because this Polish gentleman that was feeding us had told these other Polish workers that he was bringing these Canadians over that night, and so some of them came over just out of curiosity to see what Canadian soldiers looked like. And when they came in, they didn't really come right into the room. They sort of stayed near the door, and it was a slanting roof, and they were sort of half bent over, and shadowy figures, and they didn't seem to want to come right in. Seemed to be shy about coming right in. But during the conversation with this girl, one of them started to talk very loudly at me and criticize the capitalist system. So we got into a big argument, and the argument now is practically forgotten, except for a couple of phrases where he was saying that he heard that there was Canadians were starving to death and were found frozen in boxcars and weren't looked after by the government. And I knew this was true, but I didn't want to admit this to him, so I said, I heard they starved in Russia too. He said, yes, but when we starved in Russia, our granaries were empty. He said, you starved in Canada and your granaries were full. And I know deep down then he had a point, but I wasn't going to admit it to him. But anyway, with all this yelling, the other men with me, and it was Fizz Neal and Sam Stockman and myself and Casey Doda, everybody was getting upset because the German soldiers downstairs could hear this argument, and if they came up to see what was going on, we were all in trouble. So finally, the Polish fellow whose farm we were at told this guy to shut up. When we found out later that he really wasn't a Pole, he was a Russian that was masquerading as a Pole, that he'd been in Dusseldorf during a raid, and when a bunch of Poles and Russians had been killed in working parties that were working close together on the railways there, he had got the identity of a Pole, and he could speak very good Polish. In fact, he could speak very good English too, because that's what he was arguing with me in. So he probably was a high level Russian. To this day I don't know how he ended up, but anyway, it turns out that he didn't like me because I was holding this girl's hand, this Polish girl's hand, and he felt that she was evidently his girlfriend, and he didn't like that. And that's really what why he started all this yelling. But we at least got a good meal, and when we had to go back before it got light in the morning, where we got out, there was a German guard was standing, and so we had more trouble getting back in than getting out, because we had to wait till he moved, and he didn't move for quite a long time, and we had to lay out in the cold snow. And luckily, with it was snowing quite a lot, and so it wasn't easy to see us. But we could see him because he had he was standing against the barn wall, and we were laying down in the snow and didn't move until he moved and eventually got back in. That's the end of that story.
Oh, that's a good story, Dad.
Let's see how it goes. Shut it up.